Hey everybody, so how we doing today? Sometimes these videos take multiple takes, but this one I don't even want to cover, but I'm going to do it anyway, it's important. As a panel of Democrats fell over each other to pander for the rainbow vote at CNN's LGBTQ town hall, conservatives ragged at the inclusion of transgendered children, but not at the Dems' plan to shred the Bill of Rights. Broadcast live from Los Angeles on Thursday, CNN's LGBTQ town hall saw 9 Democratic presidential candidates take questions from the network's journalists and from a hand-picked crowd of LGBTQ stakeholders and members of civic organizations. It went exactly as you would think it would have. Every candidate promised to pass the Equality Act, a bill that would amend the Civil Rights Act to prohibit discrimination on the basis of the sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex-based stereotypes, and reverse certain acts of the Donald Trump administration, like its ban on transgender troops in the military. With policy dispensed with, all that was left for the presidential hopefuls to outwoke each other over 4 occasionally entertaining hours. Kamala Harris got whoops and cheers for introducing herself along with her preferred pronouns, she, her, hers, for those wondering. Julian Castro nodded along to a transgender activist, calling himself Shay Diamond, declaring misgendering as an act of violence. Well, I think I misgendered as a choir teacher once when I was 12. Is it an act of violence? Well, words can be an act of violence. Verbal assault can be an act of violence. That is to say, should it be taken form as a serious act of violence to refer to someone as the pronouns they don't want? No. That should be a slap on the wrist. Easily. Another trans activist called Blossom interrupted a question from a child to accuse CNN of ignoring the plight of black trans women. Here we go with the intersectionality. The problem of intersectionality is that it confuses discrimination with oppression. They treat it like it's the same thing. It's not. Oppression is when someone holds you down or prevents you from succeeding. Whereas discrimination is treating you differently simply because you happen to be a certain thing. This can sometimes go hand in hand with oppression, but the concepts are mutually exclusive. They have nothing to do with each other. Their association is simply because people tend to be oppressive and discriminatory at the same time. But you can be one or the other as well as both. That is one of the major problems I have with intersectionality. That, and it also creates this fictional conspiracy or power hierarchy of this fictional patriarchy that's holding everyone back that doesn't fit into their agenda. But no one has ever actually been able to show that such a patriarchy actually exists. It's a conspiracy theory. The inclusion of 2 9-year-old transgender children egged on by their activist parents rankled conservatives. The kids pressed Beto O'Rourke and Elizabeth Warren on what they would do if elected to clamp down on bullying in schools, but according to the right, the children shouldn't have been there in the first place. This mother is abusing her daughter, Elizabeth Warren, and CNN are applauding it, one commentator wrote. Now, is a parent abusing their child by putting them up on a podium, getting them to talk to another adult other than their parents? No. Are they abusing their child by having them be a trans kid? Yes. Because a child that young is not mentally capable of understanding the concept, of fully understanding the concept of gender or biological sex yet. There's a whole movement of people who years ago transitioned and now they're transitioning back. There's literally people going back on their declaration of being whatever supposed gender they are. And it's not being talked about. It's being silenced because it doesn't go along with the narrative, of course. Because transgenderism is a collective, which is sort of like a cult, but not quite. Collectives like to confuse the line of where you end and the collective begins, so everything about you becomes assimilated into it. They allow individual thought, but discourage thought that is contrary to the agenda of the collective. You can add ideas to the collective, but if those ideas are not compatible, you become the enemy, you become the other. And children do not, simply do not understand. Years later, they'll look back on it, realize they made a mistake, they will become depressed, and they will commit suicide. That is why the transgender suicide rate is so high. However, far more insidious, no matter what your political persuasion, was the sheer totalitarian zeal on display when candidates were asked they would do to tackle states lagging behind on implementing the progressive agenda. Referring to those 26 states that still prohibit blood transfusions from gay men and allow business to refuse service based on religious beliefs, the answer was uniform: crush them with federal legislation. Warren promised to abolish the Senate's filibuster rule, the 60-vote threshold needed for most legislation, to overcome Republican resistance to the Equality Act. The act itself may be benignly named, but by adding a person's gender identity to the list of protected classes under Title IX of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it would force schools to open bathrooms to transgender students, override a parent's decision to not allow their child to seek gender reassignment, and forbid therapists and doctors from cautioning these children against such procedures. Put simply, the bill would equate those opposing gender transitions for children with the racists of the Jim Crow era. Now, I will include a copy of the Equality Act in the link in the description below. It's from the Congress.gov. This is the actual website where the bill is publicly available. I have read through most of it, if not all of it, probably 70% or more. It's pretty lengthy. But so far, I agree with their conclusions. I'll look at it more in the future, and if I'm wrong, I will apologize, but I'm pretty damn sure I'm going to be right. Go figure, Democrats trying to throw out the Constitution. What do you know? It gets in the way of their agenda, they throw it out. Classic. This is why the Democrats are purely tyrannical. Wasn't this country founded on the principle of overthrowing tyrants? Why are they doing this? Businesses who refuse to serve LGBT customers based on their own religious beliefs, like the baker in Colorado, at the center of the gay cake controversy, would be forced to comply under pain of federal law. So too would hospitals who would refuse to carry out transgender surgery, and likely even beauty parlors that refuse to wax transgender women with male genitalia. This was the case in Canada when transgender activist Jessica Yaniv got more than a dozen waxing salons shut down after their female staff refused to wax her testicles. This woman is being highly disruptive of the normal function of business, and I would not be surprised if this ends up seriously impacting people's household incomes that work at these salons. You people. State-mandated sexual assault is not equality, but it would be law under the Equality Act. Even feminists have spoken out against the act, sounding the alarm at the prospect of transgender women being allowed to compete against actual women in sports, and at the idea of these biological men being housed alongside women in prisons, a policy championed by Warren. The Equality Act would still occasionally clash with the First Amendment, which protects religious speech and saw the aforementioned Colorado baker escape prosecution last year. Beto O'Rourke has a plan for that, though, and told the crowd on Thursday that he would strip the tax-exempt status of every church, college, charity, and religious institution that oppresses same-sex marriage. This on top of 24 LGBT-focused executive orders, as already promised on his campaign site. So he's doing what Anton LaVey suggested and taxing every church in the land so that they could pay back the national debt overnight? Well, of course not. The Democrats don't even believe in the national debt. They provide no solution. They just want to spend, and spend this country into oblivion. Fiscally irresponsible, tyrannical, what's not to love? And yes, it is an issue when biological men compete with women in sports because testosterone is real. Anyway, to finish off this article, is any of this surprising after all? O'Rourke has already let the public know exactly what he thinks of the Constitution with his vow to confiscate every single AR-15 and AK-47 in America. So why not go after the first two? Conservatives will likely ignore these warning shots for fear of offending the LGBT lobby and being labeled backward and bigoted. They shouldn't, though. What the Democrats displayed on Thursday was a 4-hour paean to the totalitarian state and a complete rejection of individual liberty, all wrapped up in cuddly rainbow packaging. For all their talk of culture wars and the equating of Democrats to communists of the Soviet Russia, conservatives have been utterly spineless in resisting the flagrant trampling of individual liberty. They swear to uphold If the Republican Party fails to locate its trigger warning, balls up to and beyond the next election, pretty soon there won't be a Bill of Rights left to conserve. Because that's what conservatives are about. Maintaining national identity, maintaining a population, and maintaining the status quo. The problem with conservatism, however, as being a conservative myself, I will point out that when the status quo is no longer working for everybody, it needs to work for everybody equally. It needs to be fixed, because then it is broken. However, the problem with these progressives are, instead of just fixing the one or two issues that are actual problems with the status quo, they want to change the entire status quo itself. When you try to fix something that isn't broken, surprise, surprise, you end up breaking it. There's nothing wrong with our Constitution. America is all about shirking off tyranny. But no, the state, the establishment, grows more and more authoritarian by the day. The real America is dead. America died a long time ago. And right now, we're living inside of its resurrected zombie corpse. It's a shadow of its former self. Night of the Living Dead. But to be fair, if there's any Democrats I find even remotely appealing, it's the ones they like to bury and not let speak, because they don't like to carry the party line. That is, of course, Tulsi Gabbard and Marianne Williamson. They're reasonable. They're almost like centrists. I would totally support them if they had something sane to say. Oh, but I guess I'm too reasonable even for some of my fellow conservatives, who don't want to support any Democrats whatsoever, which, believe me, I can understand that position. Anyway, I think this video has gone on long enough. You get my point. The Democrats are sickening tyrants. The transgender zeitgeist has gone too far. Yada, 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 etc., etc. I'm out of here. Peace!